this week. And because I've gone through this season after season, actually I've gotten better. When I was younger, certain pollens or whatever would cause me to actually not be able to open my eyes. It would be that bad. So as I get older, it gets better, thank God. I had as I usually do with my study time, I had a very good study time with the Lord. And I couldn't wait to share this one, especially following after Millie's message last week. And coming from a different perspective, the last time I was up here, I believe I had expressed how poetic God is. And, you know, when you look around truly in all of creation, you can see him everywhere. His mark is everywhere. And if I could just get, let's see, 1, 2, 3 volunteers to read for me, since my voice is, you know, trying to heal from all of this. Okay, Angel, Laura, you know, and Sister Reverend Dr. Evangelist, I'm just kidding, so this study, before I begin, switch. Okay, thank you. If you, Angel, could turn to, let me see, how I want to divide it. If you could turn to Isaiah 29, verse 16. Laura, if you could turn to Jeremiah 18 and have verses 1 through 11. Actually, I need one more person. Okay, Sister Judy. If you could hold on to Jeremiah 19, 1 and 2. And actually verse 10, 1, 2, and 10, Sister Judy. 1 to 10. So Jeremiah 19, verses 1, 2, and number 10. And Reverend Rondell, Romans 9, verses 14 through 24. So I will let Brother Angel begin before I give you the title to the message.
Isaiah 29, verse 16. How foolish can you be? He is the potter, and he is certainly greater than you, the clay. Should the created thing say of the one who made it, he didn't make me? Does the jar ever say, the potter who made me is stupid?
And what version was that?
New Living Translation.
I like that. Okay. You ready?
You want me to read it out of New King James, or you want me to do this one?
Whichever your choice.
I have the New King James translation. Jeremiah 18, 1 through 11. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord is saying, Arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will cause you to hear my words. Then I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, making something at the wheel. And the vessel that he made of clay was marred in the hand of the potter. So he made it again into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to make. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter? Says the Lord. Look, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. The instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom to pluck up, to pull down, and to destroy it, if that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I thought to bring upon it. And the instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to build and to plant it, if it does evil in my sight, so that it does not obey my voice, then I will relent concerning the good with which I say I would benefit it. 11. Now therefore speak to the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, Thus says the Lord, Behold, I am fashioning a disaster and devising a plan against you. Return now, everyone, from his evil way, and make your ways and your doings good.
Okay. Sister Judy, and then Reverend Rondell.
Jeremiah 19, verse 1 and 2. Thus says the Lord, go and get a potter's earthen bottle, and take some of the old people.
On the mic, please. On the mic, please. Thank you.
So it can be recorded.
Jeremiah 19, verse 1 and 2. Thus says the Lord, go and get a potter's earthen bottle, and take some of the old people and some of the elderly priests, and go out to the valley of Ben-Hinnom, the son of Hinnom, which by the entrance of
Keep going, we heard you. Okay.
and go out to the valley of Ben-Hinnom, the son of Hinnom, which is by the entrance of the potsherd gate, and proclaim there the words that I shall tell you. Then you shall break the bottle in the sight of the men who accompany you.
Please.
Thus says the Lord, go and get a potter's earthen bottle, and take some of the old people and some of the elderly priests, and go out to the valley of Ben-Hinnom, the son of Hinnom, which is by the entrance of the potsherd gate, and proclaim there the words that I shall tell you.
And lastly,
Romans 9, 14 and 24. And this is from the Living Bible.
okay.
Was God being unfair? Of course not. For God had said to Moses, if I want to be kind to someone, I will. And I will take pity on anyone I want to. And so God's blessings are not given just because someone decides to have them or works hard to get them. They are given because God takes pity on those he wants to. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, was an example of this fact. For God told him he had given him the kingdom of Egypt for the very purpose of displaying the awesome power of God against him, so that all the world would hear about God's glorious name. So you see, God is kind to someone just because he wants to be, and he makes someone refuse to listen. Well then, why does God blame them for not listening? Haven't they done what he made them do? No, don't say that. Who are you to criticize God? Should the thing made say to the one who made it, why have you made me like this? When a man makes a jar of clay, doesn't he have a right to use the same lump of clay to make one jar beautiful, to be used for holding flowers, and another to throw garbage into? Does not God have a perfect right to show his fury and power against those who are fit only for destruction, those he has been patient with for all this time? And he has a right to take others, such as ourselves, who have been made for pouring the riches of his glory into, whether we are Jews or Gentiles, and to be kind to us, so that everyone can see how very great his glory is.
Thank you, everyone that prayed. The title of the message in the study is called Unearthed and Rebirthed. Unearthed and Rebirthed. And I did not realize the commonality among those scriptures until I began to dig. And because I had first heard Romans 9 with Paul's, I guess I would call it his dissertation on the potter and the clay, but I had also heard it in Jeremiah, but not quite put the way Paul had put it. So when I started to dig and see from Old Testament to New Testament, the potter and the clay, and how everything came to be, to work in the same form, it brought me to the conclusion that as clay, it serves different purposes, yes, but it still comes from the earth. And, there's different types of earth material. There's soil, there's sand, there's clay, there's elements of gold, things, all these things that are meshed together. But there's something about clay that holds a better form than all the rest. So when the Lord spoke to Jeremiah, and he spoke to Jeremiah the way an artist would speak, and that's the way he came to speak to him as an artist. He used very expressive words and thoughts about his passion for Israel to return to him and turn away from their wickedness and the wickedness of the surrounding nations. And as we know, there are different types of art. There's the art of painting, the art of dancing, the art of singing, etc. And as we can all look around and see each other, we too are a work of art. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And as works of art, we're an expression of God. In fact, sometimes we forget just how awesome we were created and how we were fashioned in order to function properly and purposefully. And while we see the finished work of God's hands, our Father and Creator knew the process before He began the work. Every animal that exists today is still needed today. And these things that are or will be came from what already is. Nothing else needs to be created in the sense of creation. But there are many things that still need to be formed. And we being a part of creation are allowed to reform what God has created, as long as it's done according to not change its nature, because that's important. And God gave a list of things throughout the law where He would say, don't cross this seed with that seed because this will happen. And a lot of times, we get curious and we play with the nature of the seed, and then we get results that are pandemic. It starts to affect the world. It affects the food. It affects medicine. It affects us. It changes our DNA. And, there's these consequences, and then they're trying to create a cure or reform, rather, the thing that they messed up, and then there's more reformation on top of that formation, and then you have a mess. And then that's where we are today, because we are trying to be creators instead of reformers. And only God holds that authority as creator. That's why He is referred to as the creator. So, how do you know exactly what your purpose is if you are the clay? You don't know until the potter decides. But He still has a plan for the clay. And there are different places throughout the earth where clay is found. In fact, if you could just take a random guess, how many types of clay do you think there are? Who said that? Who said the number? You did? thousands of types of clays. It's not just one type of clay. Play-Doh is what we call a clay, but it's not clay. It's actually a man-made type of clay. And then there's the clay, like the vessel that's holding the flags back there. Then there's a clay that's holding the candle or the plant or whatever that is. And then there's a type of clay, you know, I mean, we could look around and see different things. There's probably some vessels in the bathrooms that hold soap and things like that. There are thousands of types of clay. So people that are evolutionists crack me up when they say, well, you know, we all came from water and dirt. And I'm like, no kidding. It's just, what part of the earth were you gathered from?
Right.
I mean, they try to make things so complicated sometimes. I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand that. We are composed of water and dirt. And the very things we eat come from the ground too. So we're going to have some things in common. But a vegetable is still different from a fruit. And a human being is still different from a monkey. You know? So, you know, we have to remember sometimes the wisdom of the world is foolishness to God, because it's like, you're not telling me anything I don't already know. So let's talk about the process of formation and the outcome of what is formed. For example, does anyone know what the word for a glass maker is called? It does start with a G. Don't Google it. All right, so I'll tell it in the form of a story. A glassmith is actually called a gaffer. Gaffer. And before glass is even glass, it is sand, right? Sand is common. And you can find it almost anywhere, but not quite anywhere, but we know where we could find it, living in the United States, right? Sand has to be unearthed, it has to be gathered from the earth by the gaffer. And the gaffer decides that he wants to make a vessel. But the sand was common before it was removed for a purpose. The sand was trampled on by people, walked on. Kids come and they gather the sand and the water and they make sand castles. And then at the end of the day, when it's cool, the sand goes back to being common again. Until the gaffer comes along and gathers that sand up and takes it back to his shop. Before then, the sand was formed and reformed again, and formed and reformed again, but it never changed its nature. It was used to being common and trampled on and played with and tracked home and swept out the door. You see where I'm going? Yeah. Until the gaffer came along. Took it back to its shop, but didn't know what its purpose was going to be. Why did this man come along and gather me up from this place? I was okay being common. I was okay being trampled on. I was okay being reshaped just to go back to being sand again. So what does this man want with me? So the gaffer takes the sand and puts it in 1700 degree heat. Once the sand goes into this heat, it has a new nature. It can never be sand again. Because the gaffer has a new purpose for the sand. Why are you putting me through this? I don't understand. Why am I in this heat, in this oven, being melted, being reformed like this? And the gaffer, because the gaffer knows the purpose of this new nature thing, even though it is liquid now, and its nature has been changed again, the gaffer now has to take a blowpipe, because it's too hot, and begins to take what was inside of him. And as this thing that was in this oven is slowly pulled out, and what was inside of him is the breath of life. So the gaffer is turning the pipe because it wants to shape this vessel. And the sand is still going through the motions, still being cooled now that it's being removed from the heat. And it's saying to the gaffer, why are you allowing me to go through this? I don't understand. I was fine being common. I was fine being trampled on. I was fine with the heat of the sun. That didn't change my nature. When the waves would come along, it would cool me. What are you doing to me? But the gaffer doesn't say anything. It just continues to reshape this new natured sand. And it makes this vessel. And this vessel holds a candle now. Its nature will never be the same. Once the nature of sand has been gathered and put through the heat like that, it will never be sand again. And no matter, even if it's smashed and ground into fine pieces, the nature will never be the same because the gaffer changed it. That's just glass. But this glass vessel now has to be handled with care because it's fragile. And the gaffer knows that. But the gaffer has to decide, do I want this vessel in my house? Or do I want to send it out with a purpose for someone else to be poured into, to perhaps gain from profit? Because after all, it's the work of the gaffer. It wasn't anybody else's work, it's his work to choose from. But it's up to the gaffer. In that same way that the sand, the nature of the sand has been removed from what was common and made holy for its purpose, is the same thing that clay is. The only difference is clay is found in mountain valleys. It's found by rivers. It's found in places that is not so common, but you still have to unearth it. And when you unearth something, you really are going out on a limb of a deep search. This potter, the potter if you will, knows the best field to get the best clay. And he's willing to go up a mountain and into a valley to unearth something that nobody else knows about, nobody has a purpose for, and that nobody else can see a good use for except trampled on. In the verse where Sister Judy read with the potsherd is actually a pottery fragment. And the pottery fragment had to be unearthed, and it's usually from years and years of sitting under something. That means, in other words, it's a fragment of a former vessel. And the potter's field is structured because the potter's field is designated for clay. So the potter buys a field where it knows it can always go and get this clay. And clay is funny when it comes to the translation of language. Can anybody guess what the Latin translation of clay is? It also starts with a G. It's something that's found in food. Some people have an intolerance to it. Gluten. It is gluten. Clay, when the Lord was speaking to Jeremiah, I often wondered why he said that. Go down to the potter and see what this potter is doing. I said, why did you tell him to do that, Lord? The clay isn't it just this thing that you just mold over and over and over again? Not quite. Clay actually has 6 stages it goes through after it's unearthed. These 6 stages, one is called slip. Slip is known as potter's glue. The clay and the water that are used to join other pieces together. Then, depending on how the slip is made, it will take on a certain consistency. The next stage of the clay is plastic. Not plastic the way we think of it, but plastic as in its durability and stretchability. This stage is used for construction, for stamping, for modeling. Then there's another stage that this clay goes through. It's called leather hard. This is the best stage for slab construction. So like this church sits on a strong foundation, it started out in these first 2 stages and has gotten to the leather hard stage before they were able to mold the inscription on it and things like that. And then even in between the leather hard stage, there are 3 sub-stages, early, middle, and late. And depending on what the potter has in mind will depend on the stage he is still able to do things. So in the early stage, he's still able to move the clay without cracking it. In the middle stage, he's not able to move the clay without cracking it or damaging it. However, it's a good stage to begin carving. So some of us are in these stages as people. And then there's the late stage of the leather hard stage, where the clay is cool to the touch and it's a good time to do detailing. This is the fine-tune work part of the stage of clay. The next stage is called bone dry. I think we can all kind of gather what that stage is. At this stage, the clay is no longer cool to the touch and it's ready to be fired. Here's that word again with the firing. So we know that glass had to be fired at 1700 degrees Celsius. How hot do you think clay has to be? Hotter. At 2,000 degrees. 2,000 degrees Celsius. Then there's this next stage after that called bisque. B-I-S-Q-U-E. This is the finished ceramics that we see, plates and bowls and vases and such, or vases, however you choose to say it. And the last stage is called glazeware. Glazeware is the finished ceramics that have a coat on them. And you decorate it and give it color and things like that. It's also called, when it's glassy, it's called vitreous. So there are some vessels that are shinier than others. This clay has to go through all of these stages in order for the potter to decide how he wants to use each vessel. And that's just the stages of clay. So after this clay is unearthed and the potter takes it back to his workshop, the clay goes through all of these stages, but before then, it also goes through sifting. because it has to remove other parts of earth, grasses, any other debris that's been in there. So it's going through this churning process constantly, and there's filters being applied. And then after that, this clay still has to go through more steps. But this is before it gets to the potter's wheel. This is all before it gets to the potter's wheel. So when the Lord said to Jeremiah, go down to this potter's house and see what this potter is doing, and how it's being marred over and over again, what stage of this clay was it in? It could have been in any one of those stages before it hits the fire, because it was still able to be molded again. That's why he said, can I not do to you as this potter is doing? So when I began to think on this thing, and even the stages that the potter has to go through with patience, because you want vessels right away, you want to be able to do what you got to do right away, but the potter is very patient. And as he's waiting for this purification process, even though it's dirt, it still has to be purified. Isn't that something? It has to have all of the things removed in order for it to be strictly clay. If there's any type of impurities in it, the potter has to start all over again. Wow. Imagine us being that clay, and we, after being unearthed, go through all of that sifting, all of that purification process, decide to go back into the common things again. And the potter has to go back to the field, take this clay, and do it all over again. I can't imagine. So, what happens when, this part I like. After the clay is washed and sifted to remove the unwanted debris, it's evaporated to remove any moisture, it's vacuumed to remove air pockets, all of these steps. Guess how long the potter has to wait before he can begin to do other work?
3 days.
Who said that?
7 days.
Not 7 days, but 7 years. 7 years. This clay has to stay put. 7 years of labor just to purify this clay before he can release it to do what it's supposed to do. That's a long purification process. Who would have thought that clay goes through such a process? I would not have. And that's God in his infinite wisdom. So once the clay has been aged, the potter makes his selection of which piece he wants to use for his specific project. And many batches were gathered, remember that. But few were chosen. Many batches were gathered, but few are chosen for his current task. So now the potter has the clay, and he wants to begin his next project, or process rather, called wedging. Wedging, after he's gotten the clay to go through all of these stages, is kind of like a baker when it takes the dough and begins to kind of pat it, pat, and he's constantly doing that. That's the wedging process. Wedging removes any further air from the clay that's been stored for 7 years. Okay? I still can't get past the number 7 on that. After the wedging is completed and the unwanted gaps of air have been removed, the potter begins his work by slapping the clay down on the wheels. It's actually called slapping. So he takes what he's wedged and slaps it on the wheel. Actually, I'm sorry, it's called throwing. He slaps it on the wheel and it's called throwing. Now, believe it or not, the potter, when he begins the process where the clay is about to be shaped, he uses his right foot. This is before technology, okay? So he sits down, his one foot is the anchor. Guess what this foot's called? Power. He uses his right foot called the power foot. And that begins the spinning of the wheel. So now the clay is going round and round and round and round. And then the potter, he gets his hands wet because he's about to get dirty with the clay. As he gets his hands wet and preparing this clay, and the clay is going round and round on the wheel, the potter has in mind what he wants already. And as he's beginning to sculpt this clay, it's just funny how Paul said it. He's pressing it down, but he's not crushing it. The clay is perplexed, but it's not in despair. It's being persecuted.
My God.
But it's not struck, or it's not what is it? Forsaken. And though it was slapped down, it's not being destroyed. This clay for the potter is going to serve its purpose no matter what. And just like the clay is dirty and the potter is dirty, they're both getting dirty together, but the potter has the last say. So as the potter is kicking forth power into getting this vessel working again, and it's screaming out kind of like the sand did, "Why are you doing this to me?" After the vessel is formed, how long do you think that vessel has to wait again? Another 7 years. But in between there's 14 days where it goes into a cool room all alone. There are other vessels that are waiting to be used as well. In between this 14-day period, the potter can change his mind about how he's made the vessel. That's where he was with Jeremiah. Can I not remake you again? I still have time before you go through these 6 stages. The potter is thinking, while it's in the cool room and it's alone and it's been purified, he may want to remake that vessel. Once the potter has his mind set and that time period has passed, the clay goes into the 2,000-degree oven. And then the potter decides, just like the gaffer, what do I want this vessel to serve? Me? Or do I want to send it out in return in hopes that it will bring something good? That it will serve its purpose for why I made it? That it will not change its form from how I made it? Because I did not make it to be a vase. I made it to be a toothbrush holder. Or I made it to be a toilet. Some people want to change their form, even though the potter did not make that vessel that way. If you were a potter, if you were the vessel that was made to hold toothbrushes, hold them well. If you were made to hold flowers, hold them well. Whatever your purpose is as that earthen vessel, do not let it be like the latter part that the Lord said to Jeremiah, can I not take this earthen vessel and smash it to the ground because it did not do what I said? I did not send this out to do what I did not call it to do. Just like the sand's nature, once it's fired, it can no longer be sand ever again. When the potter fires the vessel of clay, that's it. Its nature has been changed forever. And once the potter is upset that the vessel did not serve its purpose and smashes it to the ground, it will never be clay. We are the Lord's people. We were pulled out of the mountain valley. We were pulled away from the common sand on the beach. And the gaffer, the potter, the Lord is both, has taken us into his workshop and fashioned us the way he wants us to serve him. Some will remain in his house to serve him a certain way because they've been called and chosen to serve in that way. Others of us, he has sent out to serve the world, but expecting that which he sent out to be returned, because technically the person who came to the potter was renting the vessel. He has no say to buy it for his own ownership. The potter is the one who put the work in. My God. So his workshop, he's saying, I will rent my vessel to you, but I expect a return. And if I don't get back my return, then I'm coming after you. So as the Lord's chosen vessels, as his vessels of worship, whatever your purpose is and how he's called you to be, serve him well. And accept your new nature, because once you've been through that fire, that purification process, he expects you to hold that new nature into serving the purpose in which he had called you to be. Just like the gaffer, when he blew his breath into that blowpipe and began to form the new nature of that skin, the Lord did the same thing when he brought us out, brought Adam out from the dirt, brought all of life from the earth, and he breathed his spirit into us. Serve him well, and that's what the purpose of this message was.